I like to first begin by I like to first begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal people and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I would also like to recognize the various lands on which our Australian participants are joining us from. We gather here on unceded country, and this matters because the conversations we're about to have about pregnant women, trauma, maternal separation, echo stories this land knows too well. Many of the women in prison system are First Nations people carrying intergenerational trauma that didn't start behind bars. It began with colonization, so we begin by honoring that truth. And today, National Sorry Day. Tonight we have 90 minutes together. The team holding this space, Chris, who will be doing what he does best, convening and guiding our conversation. We have Murray and Drew helping us with monitoring comments, recordings, and any questions you like to raise throughout the session. Our two remarkable speakers here share their findings and lived experience of what happens when systems fail women and children. Professor Laura Abbott is a professor of maternal health and criminal justice at the University of Hertfordshire. Her interdisciplinary work sits at the intersection of prison research, midwifery experience, and lived experience collaboration. Excuse my Chinese tongue-tiedness. Laura's research consistently show how policy and design exclude women lived realities. Decisions made without the voices of those actually living through them. She founded the Specialist Prison Midwives Action Group, strengthening practice, peer support, and national advocacy for women in custody. She also co-founded In-Person Partnership International, and she is the principal investigator of the Lost Mothers Project. The stark reality is that many women in contact with the justice system are among the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in our society. They are themselves victims and survivors of domestic abuse, many stemming from emotional, physical, and sexual abuse from childhood. Tahlia Isaac, founder of Project Herself, brings professional expertise and lived experience to the conversation of women and the criminal justice system. Formerly incarcerated herself, she went on to complete degrees in business and criminology after her release. Today, she's a wife, mother of two beautiful boys, and a powerful advocate, not only for women's basic rights in prison, but her commitment to shedding light on the systemic challenges faced by women re-entering society after incarceration. Project Herself delivered a structured release program on a one-on-one peer mentoring and is the only service delivery in Australia that employs exclusively women with conviction histories. Something that I haven't shared even with Laura and Tahlia myself is what drove me to my initial interest a year ago following Laura's work. It was exactly, the name caught me, Lost Mothers Project. It came from my own experience of maternal separation. And again, when I was reading Tahlia's book, recently published, written by a group of women sharing their experience of incarceration, I found myself identifying with one particular story. Nina's story, a young adolescent immigrant uprooted from her culture and grandparents in Germany. Her experience of displacement and the chaotic circumstances she found herself caught up in resonated deeply. In many ways, I count my own blessing that certain protective factors were in place for me at the right time. Coming to Australia as a young teenager myself in a predominantly white culture, being the only Chinese in my suburb and school, losing my grandmother all at the same time, as Tahlia wrote in her opening chapter to her readers, if the dice rolled a different way, this book could be about any of us. So with no further ado, I'd like Chris to take over now.
Good. Thanks very much for the introduction, Sophie. And let's just warm you up a bit. Laura, could you tell us about what it is that you do and how you got into doing what you do?
Oh, thanks very much, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction. It's great to be here today. So, my background is that I'm a trained nurse and a midwife, and I was always interested in looking into spaces where people might be more invisible or less visible to society. And to cut a long story short, my midwifery background led me into an interest into looking into the experiences of particularly pregnant women in prison. And this came about because when I first started looking into this area, there was literally nothing written from women's perspective. This was back in 2012. So I trained with an incredible organisation, charity called Birth Companions, who provide support and antenatal classes and groups and birth support in prison, as well as for disadvantaged women on the outside. So I did some training with them, and then I managed to get my ethical approval to do my doctoral research in three women's prisons in England and Wales.
Great. Can you tell us about some of the organisations that you're involved with now?
So I am very much involved with the charity Birth Companions, who, as I've just mentioned, they provide support for women who are experiencing extreme disadvantage both in the community and in our prison system. And they've been going for 30 years this year. And they're an incredible organisation who, started off quite small, and it's got slightly bigger as the years have gone by. But the support that they provide for women who don't often see anyone from the outside, any organisations from the outside, we go into prisons and provide antenatal support in terms of groups. We do creative work with women, but we also provide occasionally birth support and for women who may be separated from their babies. So there's a group in one of the prisons called Mothers Apart, who are women who've been separated from their babies in that first crucial 1001 days. So it may be that a woman has a baby up to the age of 2, but they're provided with peer support. And it's something that I found when with speaking with women is the importance of having that shared group time where you're just feeling either like a normal pregnant woman or being able to be a normal mum, some sort of normality within that confines of prison systems. And charities like Birth Companions provide it. There's also other charities. We have quite a lot in the UK that do incredible work. But another group I've been doing a lot of work with is a charity called Clean Break Theatre Company, and they've been going for some years now. And they work with women who may have been involved in criminal justice settings or are at risk of becoming involved in criminal justice settings, and they do work in theatre, behind and in front of the camera. And the work that we've done with Clean Break is to um, transform some of the research that we did with the Lost Mothers Project, which was looking at women who are separated from their babies. And we worked with a playwright called Gurpreet Kaur Bhatti and Clean Break Theatre Company, and we toured a play around the country last year. And to raise that awareness so that the public can understand a little bit more about this important group of women.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And I'd like to return to that 1001 days idea as well when we move the conversation towards what should we do, but maybe a bit later on in the conversation. Talia, would you like to tell us about what you're involved in and how you got involved in that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to start by saying, Laura, like, I'm so honored to share this panel with you. You're an incredible, incredible ally to women who are in prison. So thank you for your work. And to Sophie, thank you for that beautiful opening and sharing a part of your story with us too. It's really important that we hold space for each of our stories. And so, yeah, thank you very much. Um, so what do I do? Gosh, lots of things. So I was in custody. I was in prison in 2018. I guess I was cycling in and out of custody before that. And primarily it was because I was using ice on a daily basis, and I had been since I was 19. I had been, experienced significant amounts of violence, periods of homelessness, all of the intersectional marginalizations that we can think of when it comes to the population of women in prison. So, I had I guess it wasn't a really easy, my dad was in prison when I was a kid. So it wasn't exactly easy growing up with that. And I guess it's one of the, most highest kind of risk factors when we talk about, criminogenic factors about who goes to prison is often having a parent in prison. By the time 2018 came around, I was remanded in custody. I got a 2-year head sentence for the commercial supply of a Class A dangerous drug, which was ice. And I did 10 months of that sentence on remand, which is not yet found guilty of an offence here in Australia. For those who in the UK, I don't know if it's called the same thing. It was a really tough, it's really tough when you're on remand in prison because you don't have access to a lot of things. You also don't have access to certainty. And the way that our court systems kind of work in Australia is that you often get pushed back a lot. So you'll have a court date and you think that you're going to get out on that court date, and then they push your court date back another couple of months, and you're kind of just languishing in prison until they decide you get to go home. So it's quite mentally challenging. But I was really lucky that I had an incredible therapist from an outside service who worked with me every week. We would sit 3-4 hours, and I think I cried entire lifetime's worth of tears, and kind of just let go of everything and worked my shit out, I guess, and really solidified to me that I was worth making a difference in my life. And having that one person that believed in me, was ultimately a game changer for me, because when I got out, in 2019, I haven't been back since. And I guess when I got out, I didn't know who I was anymore. I was 29. I had only ever known a life as an adult who, whole world was drugs, and that was my identity, and that was everything that I was and everything that I knew, and where I felt safe, even though I wasn't safe, and where I felt comfortable and I knew how to speak and move. And it was really challenging to forge a new identity, to kind of work out who am I in this world, and what do I believe in, and what are my values, and what do I like doing, that if it's not selling drugs or using drugs or all of the activities that kind of come with that life, then who am I? Faced a lot of barriers, but what I did have was a stable roof over my head and food on the table and people that showed up for me. And I think that probably saved my life, because there were so many times where I thought, this is so hard, I'm just going to go back to that life. Fast forward through a whole lot of messy kind of working it out years. I did I finished my Bachelor of Business, which is an undergrad in business. And then I did a postgrad in criminology and criminal justice. I also did a year of my Juris Doctor, which is a Masters of Law. And then I thought, what am I going to do with this? I don't want to work in the system. And I just started to talk about my experience, and people started to listen, and I started to think maybe I have some value to add here. And, the more I saw, the more I couldn't shut up about it. And it just kind of grew into this not-for-profit that we have now, which is Project Herself. So as Sophie said, we support women who are in custody. We do release planning and mentoring. We also do systems redesign, which looks like policy advocacy, systems change, all the things that come along with that. Media systems change is kind of like the media narrative, the community attitudes towards women, and the policies that drive women into prison. And it's also sharing stories, so the publishing of the book, doing things like this, but also the direct service delivery. So anyways, that was a really long introduction. I'm so sorry.
No, that's great, Tahlia. It's given us
Now
really
everyone knows my life story.
and you've said it's an impossible task to give your life story in that shorter time. But you've given us lots of things to think about, and one of the things I'd like to come back to is the policy and advocacy and the lived experience, because I think that's common to both of your approaches in terms of the work that you're doing, and it's also common to the kind of research that I do in my program as well, which is something I identified in both what you're doing at the moment. So Laura, can you give us some backgrounds, give us some facts and figures? What are we dealing with here in terms of the problem?
Well, in England and Wales, we know that women make up around 4 to 5% of the prison population. And like Tahlia was saying, we know that about a third of those women are on remand. So similar, when you were talking about that uncertainty, Tahlia, that really struck a chord with the women that we work with. We also know, which was touched on by Sophie, is that women are coming often from backgrounds of serious disadvantage, but also some terrible life histories of abuse, that being sexual abuse, histories of domestic abuse, violence, histories of substance misuse as well. So we have quite a traumatized population within our prisons. We know that around 80% of the women in prison are there for non-violent crimes, often crimes of poverty and addiction. So again, the women that we're working with often have backgrounds that are very complex and challenging. And again, something that you talked about, Tahlia, was that homelessness and the fact that the poverty and homelessness play a big part. And sometimes in the winter months when women are maybe on the streets and life is so terrible and they're feeling so cold, sometimes prison is seen as an answer. So we find that women will sort of come back into prison as seeing it as a place of safety, which again, we will say that prison shouldn't be the answer. The answer should be in alternatives to incarceration. So those are the types of backgrounds of the women that we're working with. And also when we're thinking about pregnancy now, we've made strides in recent years to reduce the numbers of pregnant women in our prisons. So we know that in the last year or so, there is around 196 pregnant women in prison. They make up about, sort of, again, 5% of that overall population of women in prison. And around 50 births happened to women who were in our prisons. We have 6 mother and baby units in England and Wales, and 12 prisons overall across the country. So that's a little bit of background in facts and figures. What's also quite interesting is that we didn't count the numbers of pregnant women until recently, and it was something that I sort of spoke to politicians and campaigned quite strongly for, because I thought, if we don't know the numbers, how do we know how to properly care for and plan the care of women who are pregnant in our prisons? So it's only since around 2021, 22 that we've actually been counting the numbers of pregnant women. But what we don't know at the moment, something again I've been talking to politicians about, is that we don't know the numbers of women who have children under the age of 2. So touching on that first essential 1,001 days. So the numbers of women who may have infants on the outside of prison, we don't know the numbers there. So that's in terms of numbers. But what I've always been really interested in is individuals and individual stories of women. And my research has always been qualitative, but it's always been very much sort of based on co-production. So I did my doctoral research, but then the Lost Mothers project that we did was in conjunction with the charity Birth Companions, but also we had 4 members on our team who had lived experience, who were on the Lost Mothers team right from even before we set up the project. So co-production has been really important. You know, and it's like nothing about us without us is our sort of ethos, and something that is, you know, is a red line for me as well. And that also means ensuring that it's not tokenistic, so our members are paid. You know, it's not, we don't expect people to share painful experiences of their lives and their own lived experience for nothing. It's really essential that, you know, that funders know that as well, and they properly resource, if they're expecting us to work with those that have lived experience, that the resource needs to be behind it as well. So, you know, our team are very much, it's ongoing, although the project is supposedly finished. We're not really finished, because we keep raising little pots of money to carry on working together, because we have such a brilliant team. So I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's a bit of background to those that are pregnant and new mums in prison, and a little bit more of what I'm doing here.
Yeah, that was helpful, Laura. I get the impression that UK is actually more punitive than, for example, any other country in Europe. We lock more people up. Is that right?
That's what we are. You know, we are. You know, in terms of statistics, we are one of the worst in terms of locking people up compared to other countries. And again, when it comes to pregnancy and mothers, and we know that many women in prison are mothers as well, we understand that around 17,000 children a year are separated from their mothers who are incarcerated, and that's a huge number of children. And when you think of the alternatives that could be, you know, out there for these families and these parents, we need to be more creative when it comes to thinking about alternatives to imprisonment, because it has such an effect on the whole family. So yeah, we're pretty punitive in that respect. And you know, the government, to be fair, have been trying with the Women's Justice Board. I sit on a national advisory forum giving, you know, advice and support for politicians as well. However, you know, we haven't gone far enough. And when we go inside of our prisons, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this, about the thoughtlessness, the fact that prisons are not designed, you know, they're patriarchal, they're not really designed for women, let alone pregnant women and mothers. So thinking about that, it's yeah, I would say we could be more creative. And there are 11 countries in the world that don't lock up pregnant women. So, you know, again, that's something that I know the government are trying to push forward. But what we do need is proper alternatives out in the community. Because where are these women going to go? You know, who's going to be providing that support and care? So that's really important to consider.
It is helpful to think about starting points, isn't it? About the kind of society that you're dealing with when you're lobbying.
Really, do you want to take your dinner and call Anna?
I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. So, because if particularly what seems to me to be an arms race of being tough and authoritarian these days, that political parties are trying to outdo each other, showing how tough they are, which means being more punitive, not less. So it must be quite a difficult campaigning environment, I would imagine.
I think so, and I think that's why, you know, working with organisations like Clean Break Theatre Company, to bring to life the types of experiences that women may have through theatre and through film, can really break down those barriers, and help us to understand that, again, there's individuals who have lives and families and children, and that one mistake should not define somebody's whole life, and it often does, and the repercussions go on and on often for those women. So yeah, absolutely, it's you know, there are ways that we could try and make things better, but I think it starts with the community, actually.
Tahlia, can you give us some background to the context in which you're working?
Yeah, so Australia has a hangover from the punitive importation of colonial laws to us when we were colonized over 200 years ago. So, you know,
sorry, apologies.
Yeah, no, I'm looking straight at you, Chris. No, I'm kidding. it's challenging. It's really challenging. But this is the system that we have, right? This is what we have to work with now. So we women are the fastest growing prison population in this country, and they have been for year on year for the last 10 years. We have currently sits just under 4,000, so 3,832 at the last count. We had women in prison across this country. So, over 40,000 people in prison. So they make up a small percentage, but we have about 40 women's prisons across the 8, I think it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 jurisdictions. So each state has its own criminal code, and each state has its own Corrective Services Act. So the way that prisons operate and the demographics of women that go to prison kind of differ a little bit state by state, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 22 times more likely to be incarcerated than non-Indigenous women. We see, in terms of maternal health stats, we have about, at the last, roughly it was 170 women coming in, so about 7% of the prison population are pregnant or give birth in custody. The types of women that are coming into prison, 1/3 are homeless before coming to prison, 2/3 exit into homelessness. We have only 1 in 10 women have secure employment when they're leaving prison. Almost all women who are in prison have experienced violence, and 66% have experienced child sexual abuse, domestic violence, and family violence, all 3 forms, which is pretty significant numbers. They're the kind of, that's what we're kind of working with. We do have kind of this race to the bottom when we're talking about tough on crime policies and how we can curb offending. And it always kind of baffles me that we have entire universities that are set up to produce the most robust data about what works to solve social issues. And we have leaders who have these inquiries into justice, and then they go, thanks for all that data and all of that expertise, but we think as politicians, career politicians, my local politician's a career electrician who decided to run for politics. He thinks that tough on crime is actually the way to go to solve it. So I'm always kind of sitting in this space where you have to kind of work with what you've got. And I live in a remote community, so I live in a very punitive area, quite racist, quite conservative. And so, yeah, it can be really challenging. So that's the data that we're working with, and they're the kind of environments that we're working with at the moment.
Queensland seems to be worse than others from your figures. Would that be right?
So Queensland, in terms of how many women we incarcerate,
yeah.
Queensland incarcerates the most.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have about 1,100 at the last census. It was about 1,100. We're just about to have new data released. My expectation is that has gone up to potentially 1,200 to 1,300. So yeah, we account for 1/3 of the country's total prison population in this state. Yeah.
And I suppose in both your cases, so much for evidence-based policy making. On the one hand, it's evidence-based policy making, except in this instance.
Yes. Well, potentially it's except in any kind of politicized, crime and justice has been such a highly politicized topic that governments have gone, oh, this will get votes, and so we ignore evidence because we just want to stay in power. But I think when it comes to kind of anything, we're talking about the climate before, we kind of ignored that too. And, healthy start for kids, we kind of ignore that too. And I don't know, yeah, I don't know, politicians are just going to do whatever they want.
Yes. Difficult to work in that environment. And the pattern of discrimination, I mean, this is addressed to you both really, the pattern of discrimination. So let's take the idea, Laura, that you picked up of institutional thoughtlessness, which is a kind way of saying it, really. I mean, what we're really talking about is discrimination, aren't we? But
Kind
I
of. I
mean,
think, it's interesting because, when the prison system was designed, it wasn't designed to
yeah,
harm pregnant women,
yeah,
but no one designed it with them in mind either.
yeah,
So, when it was all thought of, and it means that it is a kind of way of saying it, but it is about thoughtlessness, and it sort of builds on others' work. So it wasn't that concept wasn't my idea.
yeah.
It was um put in. It was thought of by another academic called Elaine Crawley, who was doing some research into elderly men, and she saw that the system didn't think about them either,
Mm.
when it came to prison. So I thought it applied really nicely to pregnant women, but also can apply to other sort of minority groups, in general, actually, in prison. I think that's quite important. So, it's like it's just they hadn't thought of it, so now they're having to think about it. It's putting it into their consciousness.
But to go on not thinking about it when it's pointed out over and over and over again, you'd have to say it's more than just not thinking about it in the first place. So
I
I'm
think
thinking about the pattern of incarceration. So 22 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're Indigenous in the Australia. I'm sure the pattern is probably very similar, although I don't think as extreme as it, Laura, in the UK of banging up women who are black and ethnic minority.
I think again it's an area that we haven't looked at strongly enough, and I think looking at black women and ethnic minority women, I think it's really important. I think it's coming to light more often, more in recent years. I think it's really important. It's something that came out in our lost mothers research, actually, when we were looking specifically at the decision making when it came to removal of a baby at birth or at or around birth, and we were able to sit on some decision making boards. And I remember in particular there was one decision making board where there were 12 members of staff, from prison staff to healthcare staff, and they were all white, and the woman that they were making the decision about was a black pregnant woman, and it was really stark to us. But again, it felt like it hadn't really been thought about. So that the lack of cultural awareness and sensitivity when it comes to race is something that we have drawn upon in our lost mothers research, and pointed out in our report as well, as something that needs consideration, definitely, and needs more research. Actually, we need to hear more black women's voices in research, and I say that as a white woman, so sort of recognizing my own white privilege when I'm talking about this. Is really important that we do involve and work with women who have different ethnicities. Really essential.
Tahlia, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think yeah, gosh, it's so hard. I do think there's this level of thoughtlessness, but then there's also a level of intention when it comes to prisons, and it's also almost like it's not the people in the systems, it's the way that the system was designed initially for punishment. But as we've progressed as a society, and as we understand more and more about the human condition, about how people don't respond to punishment, that actually what we want is to hold people accountable in this relational way. We want people, even the way we've parented our children is come from this really harsh, corporal punishment to this more of a gentle talk-based, because the evidence has evolved. And so with prisons, the evidence has evolved and the community expects more. And that's where the community engagement piece comes in, like with Clean Break and with our book, is that as we educate the community more and we expect more from people and we evolve in our understanding of how prisons are, it's almost like prisons have not evolved since they were imported here. And I can't speak for the English context because it's not my area of expertise, and I have absolutely no idea about history when it comes to that. But and I'll just put that on the table. But what I do know is that I've spoken to so many women who were in Boggo Road, which was like Queensland's first women's prison, and they talk about the same conditions and the same like environments as what we're talking about today. In 50 years, we have seen little to no improvement in the conditions, and so that's why we're not seeing the right outcomes. Like that's why we're seeing this recidivism rate, like women returning to custody within the first 2 years, over half of them will. So like 60% of women will return to custody with the first 2 years of being released. It's like the most ridiculously insane, ineffective system. And yet we continue to funnel $7 billion a year into it. So yeah, I think there's a level of thoughtlessness. I also think there's a level of awakening that we're in this period, and it feels different. Like people are talking about it, people are caring about it, people care about women in prison. You know, we're seeing big corporations like actually back lived experience. Like we see, you know, like people in the community uptake our book that I just never even considered. I, you know, be invited to kind of stand on a National Press Club stage as the first formerly incarcerated women. Like all these different things are happening and the system is awakening, but also the changes are very slow. Like even the most basic of things like strip searching, we know that harms women who have been sexually abused, and we have the technology to replace it. And yet there's this level of resistance from correctional centers that like they're not uptaking it. So like it's not thoughtless, like that's intentional, that's a choice. Yeah, so it's hard. It's a hard one.
Yeah, and I think you have both said in your various work that I've read that the system serves nobody. So one of the questions is, why does it persist and how does it persist? But it's worth, although obviously it's worse for the women who are incarcerated, but there are some quite touching stories about the prison officers themselves and the people involved in working with women in prisons who themselves are traumatized by what's going on. So everybody is suffering.
Yeah. I think this like question of like, why do we persist is like, well, because what else do we do? What and like we all kind of know the answers, right? It's like investment in community-based alternatives, but for politicians and for the general community, it's often this question of like, yeah, but what, like if someone's harmed somebody else, like what do we do there? So getting like community on board en masse is really challenging. I've spoken to so many campaigners in this country and, you know, have been doing this for like 20 years and they're like, Tahlia, people just don't give a shit. They just don't care. Because prison is a place over here where bad people go. And like, as long as they're away from me and out of my community, I don't care. So it's like, how do we get people to care? And then we can start to look at what the alternatives might be and invest in those, because then it'll be politically viable for people to do so.
It's so true, isn't it? It is, and like we're saying, it's just, and what you're saying, Tahlia, is how it's like trying to move a sort of great big cargo ship and turn it around. It's so slow. I mean, everything in prison happens slowly. You know, everything's quite backward and behind when it comes to, you know, technologies and moving things forward. So I think, you know, from that perspective, it's really hard to enact change when things are so slow anyway. It takes a long time. And what we see is a lot of policy writing and a lot of policy change, but the policy doesn't often hit the ground. So you mentioned as well the prison officers and those that are working in prisons, and it can be very difficult and traumatizing for staff, especially when it comes to working with women who may be separated from their babies, for example. Something that we have had in recent years is, you know, since doing my research and since around sort of 2021 again, is we have pregnancy, mother and baby liaison officers who are operational staff who are a conduit between sort of maternity and midwifery services and the woman. And women are finding those staff, quite supportive in those roles. So that's a new role. So something, good that's come about. But again, that's taken a long time. It's really slow and doesn't really answer the question about we shouldn't really be banging these women up in the first place. So we shouldn't even really need these staff if we had it in the community. And we do, like Tahlia said, we know the answer is in the community, but how do we get that public shift and that people to sort of change their minds and perceptions that may have been built over years and years and years. And also, I think you're absolutely right, Tahlia, that element of risk of what if this is a bad call? How is it going to look for us? So we really need courage, politicians who have courage and compassion, and we do have some, but we really need them to sort of work with us and like you were saying before about the evidence, we've got all the evidence. We don't really need any more. But now it's time to change. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's almost like the evidence that we'll provide now is almost just it will just sort of reinform what we already know. So it is about having. I think it's all about courage now. But I've no doubt that we can get this change happening. I think it's just how long is it going to take, and how many years how long are we going to be around for? We want to see this change in our lifetime. So it's we're not giving up though.
No. I saw a really interesting policy change come in England and Wales, in that anyone who was going to serve less than a year in custody now is community alternative sentencing. So like they're spending time doing community. Is that like in place now? Is that a thing now?
It is trying to be in place now. It's in theory it is. So we have problem solving courts. We have one in Birmingham. We have a women's problem solving court where, instead of going to prison, there's all the organisations that come together and try and work with that woman to have some sort of alternatives in place for her. But the problems that we're seeing now is that we're not meant to have short sentences, but women are still going away for maybe a short time, or they come to the end of their sentence, they come out of prison, and within a couple of days they're being recalled. They're breaching their sort of probation conditions, but that's often they've been set up to fail, and often they might be placed into homelessness or back into the area that they have some poor connections with people that may be offering the temptation of drugs, and or they may end up back in a domestic abusive relationship. So we're not really doing much. We're like waving them out of the door, and then there's nothing to sort of hold women when they're going into the community. So again, we're
providing them the choice and resources to actually make a different choice in their lives.
That's one of the things that you work on, Tahlia, isn't it? About work on sort of exit planning, or I don't quite know what you call it, but working with women to think about what will happen when they leave.
Yeah, I think it came about because we knew that women were just being churned out. So our average sentence length here is less than 6 months for women. So they're just being churned out without an opportunity to actually sit with a caseworker in the prison and map out what their release is going to look like. And also too, there's no resources. So there's not like the internet, or like you can Google like what rehab I want to go to, or any of that stuff. So yeah, we go in and provide release planning, but also mentoring, just to help women build like pro-social language around what it looks like to get out. How can we like reframe that, and in a really strengths-based way? Like, how can we reframe the narrative about what it looks like to get out of prison? Because all of these things will tell us, like, you're going to go back, you're never going to get off drugs, you're going to be homeless, this, that, like all of these like stats that come at you, and that's all we've ever been told. But actually we do have a choice, and prison's such a great prison is such a great, do not take that out of context. Prison's a really great intervention time, because women are, they're there, they're ready, they're hungry for that. And because there's no distractions, you don't have these competing kind of things. So it's a really great time to like intervene in that for them, and to really, I guess, you know, show them the alternative and be a role model about what it looks like, you know. And for a lot of women, we know that often circumstances will dictate their situation, but I always say, like, our choices actually dictate our life. Like, our choices are going to dictate, not our circumstances. And just trying to, like, reframe their brain around what it could look like to get out of prison and not come back. Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly the identity work that you talked about in your own case, Tahlia, wasn't it? About how you have to think about yourself differently. And I suppose that problematic is framed at both ends of the spectrum for the individual, thinking about who am I and how am I going to get on in life once I'm released, but also the kind of identity work that we're doing with our societies to think about who are we to treat people in this way. What does it say about us if we're prepared to be so punitive and to add humiliation and grief on top of all the other things that we're doing in terms of punishing women?
Yeah. The grief is heavy in some prisons, especially when there's loss, especially if there's been a birth and children have been taken. I remember being in prison with a woman, and she was only like 5 or 6 days due for a release, and she went into early labor, and she had to give birth in handcuffs. And then she gave birth to her twins, and they just took her straight back to the prison without her babies as soon as she'd give birth. And I just think, like, you could just hear her screaming, like, and you just think, what was her crime so bad that we would do that to not only her, but her children? And we know the impacts that separation from others has on children. And I just think, yeah, you're right. Who are we as a society if that's what we allow to happen?
Can we go back to the 1001 Days idea, Laura, and tell me what that's based on? What's the idea behind that?
It's basically, it's 1001 critical days. It's based on the time between from conception to age 2 as being such a crucial time, both in the mother and the baby's life. And thinking particularly about attachment and bonding, and what you said just then, Tahlia, is you know. And I can really, it really resonates with a lot of the lost mothers work, the research that we did with separation. You know, what harm are we doing? We know that there are going to be circumstances where there is going to be necessary compulsory removals of babies. There may be situations that are too dangerous, perhaps, potentially, but the majority of cases, we should be keeping the mother and baby together. And if we've got mother and baby units that are fully staffed and sort of, you know, women that you're never more observed than you are in prison anyway. We should be attempting to keep mothers and babies together, and the 1001 critical days really looks at that attachment and bonding and how essential it is, and what harm that can do to the baby as well. And again, what Tahlia described, the woman's reaction, and having spoken to those women, you know, we spoke to, in the Lost Mothers Project, we spoke to 29 women who'd had babies removed at or around birth, and they all described similar feelings of real visceral, raw emotions, where they felt like they were losing a limb or losing a part of themselves. And they often described it in really violent language of the baby being ripped away from them. So it's the harm that we're doing is incredible. You know, again, with the caveat of sometimes it's going to be necessary. We know we can't escape some of the stories that we might see in our newspapers where children have been neglected or harmed, maybe by parents. However, in you know, the case the default often tends to be to separate rather than to work to keep those families together. And I think that's something where the 1001 Days framework will come in, where an assessment's done, and this is something Birth Companions are doing a lot of work on at the moment, is to have an assessment in place, whether women are in the community or whether they're in prison, on probation, just having that knowledge and understanding that is such a crucial time to be able to assess against that, to make the decision about how we best support and care for this family, really. So yeah, I think with regards to the work that we've done, and loss and grief, Tahlia, as well, is just such a huge has such a huge impact. But also what you were saying, that the impact maybe on you, Tahlia, and the women around you, having to witness things that most of us don't have to witness in our lifetime, actually. And it's not just the witnessing of it, it's hard to explain, but it's the atmosphere, the tension, the feeling in the air of that heaviness of grief, that sort of permeates our prisons, which is something that is hard to put into words, but it's something that you can feel very strongly when you're there. You know, and the women that spoke to us were really brave, but also really clear that they wanted their stories to be heard. Because you feel, when you're going into prison and you're doing this type of research, sometimes you feel a bit worried. I know with me, I feel worried that I'm misrepresenting, or it could even feel to some that might be a bit mawkish, that you're looking into people's lives at their most vulnerable. But it was really important to us to know that women really wanted us to share this. And that's one of the reasons we made Scenes from Lost Mothers, which was the play that really depicted that sort of loss and grief, and it had a huge impact on audiences, actually. So yeah, I've gone off again. I always do this, Chris. I go off on a bit of a tangent.
It's fun.
That's great. I mean, you too, Tahlia, are using lived experience in that way. I mean, in your book, but also in using mentors in prison who can speak from lived experience. And there is something incredibly compelling about it. You'd have to have a heart of stone to hear some of those stories and not be moved by them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what you were saying, Laura, about like, you know, the impact that it has on other people, it's like when you witness somebody else's grief and powerlessness like that, it reinforces your own powerlessness. It reinforces this, like, you have no power right now, and you are so bad that this is what you deserve. That's kind of what it reinforces. And it's really interesting this way that we kind of frame like this deserving or not deserving mother in terms of like, look, I'm all, you know, children need to be protected 100%, but it always kind of baffles me that we're able to throw everything we have at removing a child and placing it somewhere else, and pouring resources into a foster family or a resi care home, and millions and billions of dollars in this country into resi care homes, but we won't, or prisons, but we won't redirect that cash into actually lifting families above the poverty line so they're not live on $30 a day, or supporting them in, like, you know, healthy parenting, or, you know, getting them resources so they can have a car so they can drive places, or, you know, just the most basic human needs being met. Like, we'd rather pour millions into these alternatives to keep children safe, and yet we know that those alternatives don't even keep children safe. So it's a false narrative that they sell us, that, like, you know, oh, we're protecting this child, and especially Aboriginal children, like, and Torres Strait Islander children, when we remove them from country and place them in another placement, they often just return back to that family. So we're pouring millions into this alternative, and then they're still trying to go back to their families. So yeah, I always find that really challenging to wrap my head around, and really challenging to kind of sit in that complexity and to sit in that balance, that, because I understand children need to be safe, but I also understand that, like, they'd probably be safer if we could just help families rather than rip children away. Yeah. But yes, I think what you guys do is just so incredible, and it is really important that our voices are heard, and it's really important that women have agency to say their story, like to talk their truth, because we're spoken about, we're spoken over, we're spoken at, but we never actually get to the chance to say things for ourselves. And so giving, like Laura, giving those women that platform to have their voices heard is, you know, the most important work that you can ever think of doing. And that play, I got to see it. Like I actually, yeah, if there's a recording, please send it to me.
Yeah, we're going to be having some recordings actually, and watch this space for a film as well. So, you know, a short film. So, but we will be doing some recordings. I'll send you. We have got one of the scenes which I can share, and maybe resources afterwards can share. There's one particular scene which we one of the actresses was amazing. Is about her being handcuffed, and I think it really, we released that on Mother's Day last year, and it had a real impact again on, you know, on those that watched it. So yeah, I think a film is the next step. So watch this space, and we'll be able to share that as well.
We will make available a list of resources for anybody who's attended this morning, so they can go and look you up in more depth if they want to. I want to move a bit towards some questions from the delegates, but I also wonder whether you have questions of each other, Tahlia and Laura. Is there anything you'd like to ask each other in order to kick us off?
I don't know. I'm really bad at questions, Chris.
I know, I'm bad. I'm bad at questions.
Let's kick off with everyone else's questions.
Yeah, it's lovely. I would just say it's really lovely to share a platform with you, Tahlia. It's just great. And I think also, you know, again, women with lived experience, I think it's really essential. And I think it'd be nice to sort of maybe link you up with some of the women in our team as well, and have a stronger global voice. I know also in the States, Rebecca Schlafer does some incredible work, and she has a doula, the doula project over there, and they have again incredible group of women with lived experience. So I think maybe a global network to sort of, you know, again, it will just really sort of build that momentum and strength, and it breaks down the myths. I think I don't know, you know, there's always an assumption about, you know, and there's assumptions about women in prison in general, but I think it really does break down those barriers as well. That wasn't a question though, was it? Sorry.
That's fine. And that was one of the intentions between hosting this, really, to bring people closer together, interested in talking about this, and see what comes of it. So, delegates, participants, and anybody has a question for our two speakers?
I do, Chris. That's
okay. Jane, go ahead.
Well, it sort of starts with a rant. It's just like, oh my God, you know, it's. I thought it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad, and I feel very moved by what you're saying, and ashamed of, you know, it's like, well, where am I? Well, when all this is happening, so it's very moving. The two things that really, well, the three things that stick out for me. One of them is this issue of society, who wants to split people into good and bad. And if you can then take away the bad, then we can forget about them. And that there's a book was written in the 1980s, I think, called When Society Becomes an Addict. And it's like when you have a really dysfunctional society that is addicted to power, to having a daddy that looks after you, and you don't have to think, and you can do what you're told, and all the bad gets taken away. We have got to deal with that issue of human nature, and that kind of structural kind of addiction to somebody knowing. So there's that who is good, and there's who is bad. And the other, the thing that I'd really like to hear a bit more about as well is just the power of stories, because in piercing that defences of society, it just seems to me that stories are the only way. You know, we can't reason people out of this. And you know, the other point I wanted to make was the one you made, Tahlia, that really struck me, which is, you know, politicians just want to stay in power. They don't really want to do good, and they don't really know about this stuff. So they want to keep in power with all these people who don't want to face up to things. So we're in a real vicious circle. And it's just that, you know, that we need to kind of, all of us, you know, work through, like, how do we pierce that? It's the same around climate change, about inequality. you know, around gender issues, around race. It's all the same thing. Is like it's all over there. So I'm just interested. I think this issue of story is the only thing I can, you know, it's our most hopeful. It's the lived experience that Chris talks about, you know. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about how you view stories. You've said a little bit about it, but that's very interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, they're really great reflections. Like, how do we get people to buy into holding the two at once, you know, to holding the fact that yes, people can do harm, but also we need to show people a better way to then exist in our society. And I talk a little bit about like the social contract and how it's kind of, you know, this social contract theory about like we're supposed to be provided this basic, you know, the basic needs, the basic conditions for social cohesion. And then our end of the bargain is that we abide by the governing laws and we allow our systems of justice to be enacted by, you know, the government of the day. So but what happens in that is that actually they're not upholding their end, and so but punishing us and expecting us to just abide by. So there's this, you're right in that how stories are so powerful is that actually when what I noticed when I shared my story personally, and I was sharing it a lot at the beginning, was that every time I would share it with somebody new who didn't know about prisons, it was like their world was changed forever. And you know, especially in my culture, like with mob, storytelling is how we've existed for 65,000 years on this land. And so the power of stories is actually how we carry change through generations. And I think if people can see a little bit of themselves in you, it's almost like what Sophie said. It's like, well, the dice rolled in a different way, you know, it draws out this empathy in people. And that's why I wrote the book. And I got other women to contribute. And one of the authors was on this call tonight, Natasha. So I got other women to contribute to the book as well, because it's not just my story that's important. It's all of our stories, all of the women who have gotten out of prison and not gone back. It's like we're all doing it in different ways. And so if as many stories as we could share, if other people could see themselves in just one of those stories or like be touched by one, we could change the way that people see. And then what we see is what we demand. And if we, you know, just like how you feel like, where have I been while all of this has been going on, is like, then we demand change. And then it's no longer politically viable to go, well, we're just going to lock people up, because people see the bullshit and go, well, this is actually working. You're not changing the course of crime in this country or in any country. And so it starts to not be a political football anymore. So that's how I think stories really make a difference, and how I've seen it change and make a difference for sure in my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of research as well, and I really I love, you know, the work that you're doing, Tahlia, because it, like you say, it's stories, it gives that authenticity that numbers can't give. And when we think about data, we often think about, you know, numbers. But the way that I have done research and the way that our team does it is through qualitative methods, and so that is through hearing women's experiences and drawing out what the themes are. And again, it's the stories, and I think that's what's really important, and I think that's often what's missing. There's often a thought that it's all about the numbers and the data, but what we really need is to hear lived experience. It's much more powerful than anything. And we're going to Parliament again. We went to Parliament last year, and we're going to Parliament again this summer. Again, we'll have a panel with those that have lived experience, and our lived experience members will evoke far more reaction than anything any one of us could say, which I think that's what's really important. And to be at the heart of Westminster, and to be able to have events like that facilitated. And again, we're going to be bringing Clean Break and having some films of the play shown. That's what's going to evoke the change. And we really need to get into people's hearts and have that empathy drawn out I think, you know, with our politicians, and do it collaboratively together. So
I think it links to what one of you was saying before, probably both of you, about relationships. The thing about narrative is it puts you in relationship as storyteller and story receiver, if you like. You have to imagine yourself in the situation that the person is describing. So this talk of the system or the policy or the numbers doesn't help you understand that relationship in the same way.
100%.
Anybody else have a question?
I had a question, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tahlia and Laura. I'm Chris Roach. I work at La Trobe Uni, but I used to work for Oxfam as a kind of activist. And what you've described in terms of systems change, multi-level kind of shifts of narratives of working with individuals, the community, it all kind of is so resonant and very powerful. And I guess the question it leaves for me is how you deal with funders, donors, and the rest of it who, in theory, get it, but the invisible work of building relationships, of building esteem, of building coalitions is really difficult to communicate, and stories is one way of doing that. But I just wondered what strategies you use with donors and funders to keep them on board when some of this stuff is maybe impossible to share for privacy reasons and the rest of it, as well as being kind of invisible, not measurable, and the rest of it. Stories is part of it, but I just wonder if you had other strategies of dealing with the funders and the donors that might want to support you.
My strategy is my relationship is with them. So like they back me and my vision, and the work is kind of second to that. I guess that's the advantage of lived experience and have been in prison myself, is that, you know, yeah, I guess that's how I get around it, is that we kind of, lots of our cash is untied to metrics. And also the model that we have at Project Herself is actually, we are a social enterprise. We charge a fee for service for our mentoring, not to the women, but to the prisons. And so we can do whatever we want with the cash because we're delivering a service. So yeah, it's hard, but I know what you're saying when you have to tie it to a metric, and a lot of those metrics are kind of not measurable. How do you present it? It's a good question, and I guess it's about the type of funder that you've got.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, with myself, it's more about getting research funding, which is incredibly competitive at the moment, especially at the moment. So, you know, with the charities that we work with, they're often quite small organisations that don't necessarily have their own offices. So it's really hard, and it's a constant you know, struggled for funding. I know that with organisations, especially ones that are just starting up. There's an organisation in Manchester that's brilliant, called Coming Home, and it's particularly for women who are being released. So Tahlia, you might be interested in the work that they're doing, and again, there's very small, just startup charity. And how do you and just ploughing all of their goodness into doing this, and how do you get funding? So it's hard. Research funding is one thing, but also for the small charities, I think it's just raising awareness, and I think, you know, especially when it comes to small charities, they're often not really heard of, and how do we get them, you know, a seat around the table with some of the bigger charities as well.
Mm.
Thank
not
you.
great, Chris. Sorry.
No, but the only other thing I was thinking is that I don't know if you know Justin Parker's work on the politics of evidence. I mean, his argument is that you move from the politics, evidence-based policy to the governance of evidence, arguing that if you don't have as you're kind of both saying, you don't have the lived experience around the table when evidence is considered and debated and decisions are made, then you're never, given the politics of how all of this works, then evidence is never clean in that sense. And therefore, who is around the table making the decisions and giving the evidence becomes the primary objective. So his work's really good on that.
I'll look it up.
Anybody else from delegates, participants who'd like to ask a question?
Jean's put in the chat, is the topic of women imprisoned on the agenda for any of the INGOs? I don't know what an INGO is. Is it just
international NGOs?
Oh, okay. Oh,
like Oxfam, like Chris was describing.
Oh, yeah. The UN Women. They have the crime. Oh God, I can never. It's like a big acronym, but yeah, UN have what do you know what it's called again?
I don't know. There's so many. I have to always look them up.
It's like crime and society or something like that. Crime and drugs and society or something. Yeah, the UN have a thing that they focus on. And I look really professional because I have no idea what it's called.
Is that a bit like the Bangkok rules and everything?
Yes, that's
it.
Yeah,
that one. I know which one you mean, but I just can't remember what the acronym is. But UN sounds good enough, Tahlia. That's
the UN. I should just shut up at that.
But yeah, the Bangkok rules. Yeah, they do. There are again. I don't really know how it works from an organisational perspective. There are different international charities, aren't there? I believe there's an international penal reform charity, I think.
Yeah. Penal Reform International.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
You guys have got one over there called Rescaled, which works across the Europe and UK, Ireland, Scotland.
I don't know how much is diverted into the smaller charities, though. It's often the things that you can't really, like you said, Tahlia, the metrics that you can't really measure. The sort of compassion, the listening, the sitting in groups, you can't really measure that. The importance of that type of work that is not necessarily sort of something that you can quantify. It's hard. Yeah.
Community, that's what it is. It's like you're providing community. And yeah, I think funders are like, well, we're not going to fund you to have a community. That doesn't meet any of our targets.
It's about individual outcomes and reducing recidivism and things like that, rather than
correct. Yeah, hard metric things. Yeah. Have to find really creative ways to kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
In a way that
I feel as though there's kind of a contemporary aversion to groups. Everything has to be based on individuals, and the idea of running things as groups is becoming more and more alien. And I've even had that discussion in our university, Laura.
Yeah.
About the importance of the staff being able to work in groups if they expect the students to work in groups.
Yeah.
But this idea of group-based work seems very threatening and frightening because you can't tie the outcomes down in the same way, because you never know what's going to happen when you're in a group. Tahlia has frozen. I don't know whether we've lost her altogether. Oh, there you're back.
Oh, you're back, Tahlia.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I think it's that, again, taking risks, isn't it? It's wanting to see some results and seeing where your money's going, I guess, with the funders.
And one of my questions was around I know often people do want their stories to be told, and I've had that experience myself working with Palestinians and with refugees. But there's also the danger of re-traumatizing the person who's telling their story, isn't it? And I suppose is that where the group becomes helpful in terms of supporting that person, that they feel that they're not isolated in sharing their experience?
I'd also just challenge that, because what we always talk about self-determination and allowing people to self-determine what they want for their lives. And I often find that especially people who might not have the same lived experience as the cohort that they're being told stories about, that they're often like, oh, we don't want you to, we want to try and protect you or, shield you from this. And I always bring that into the conversation. And I say, well, actually, self-determination means that they get to choose whether they want to share that story.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's not up to us to try and decide whether or not it's right for them to tell that story at that time. I find a lot of universities, especially in Australia, are quite like that. They're quite risk adverse when it comes to people sharing stories and do they have enough support to share the story? So yeah.
I think this is really a really interesting strand to go down, absolutely, because I remember with the play, the play is very evocative and really hard to watch. I mean, it was a half an hour play, but the scenes in it was sometimes very, very distressing, and we often had women with quite often have women with lived experience in the audience, and it would often really resonate, and people would get really upset. But like you say, it's not about us necessarily protecting people, not infantilizing people. Sometimes it can feel quite cathartic, actually, to rather than being re-traumatized. But also, what I love about organizations like Clean Break and Birth Companions, they're very aware of the types of language that could manifest in a traumatic response. So they especially Clean Break, they provided this incredible self-care guide for those to read before the play. It was lovely because it meant that you could really make an informed decision. You knew that this, there's no getting away from it. This play is gonna be hard to watch, but
it's gonna go.
Here's some help. Here's some ways to help. Here's some ways to ground yourself. It's not just a list of organisations. It was really sort of proper grounding techniques in very, very trauma informed. And I mean, I remember watching it myself because the actors in the play was so authentic, and we were in Parliament with it, and there was one of the actors was so convincing, and I was sitting at the front, and I had to sit on my hands to stop myself getting up and say, you don't have to do this, because it really came from her heart when she was acting. So it is about how we sit with our own discomfort as well. As well as that sort of natural wanting to shield people and protect people, without sort of being sort of paternalistic. So does that make sense, do you think?
Yeah.
I'm
if
sorry
I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead. So I was just going to say that I, in a very different context, I work in a community where we also encourage people to take risks with each other and for it to be uncomfortable. So if I implied in any way that we should protect people from sharing things, that's not what I meant.
No.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sophie.
No, yeah, it's actually funny. I mean, we've been doing salons before it was called Complexity Salon. It was Sophie's Salon because I just wanted to do something that I can own. I mean, being a Chinese immigrant, being a good citizen, in business, we've helped other charities, and this time, thanks to my team who trust in me, sometimes I get this feeling and I just need to run with it. This particular one has been, I haven't got the capacity to articulate it yet, but the quality of this process, I mean, I was completely emotionally caught up as I shared a little bit, but every process has been different, every theme. So, but this one has definitely something that I can't even describe it. It is a discipline of the heart. It's something to do with the heart. So, and I just want to thank you both for giving us this opportunity to do it. And I thank my team members for not really understanding why I was so emotionally involved in a way that I think I got quite cranky at times, just let me do, you know, certain process. And it was lovely. I mean, it was exactly what Laura and Tahlia is talking about. I mean, Laura, I'm hopeless with social media. I hate LinkedIn, but I do it. So I contacted Laura a little bit last year and say, wow, this is it. And then when I saw Tahlia on the National Press Club address, there was just something about it that grabbed me in that moment that I have to contact her, and she'll probably reject me. But I just said, please, you know, we're nobody. We're just, you know, Complexity Salon. What's Complexity Salon? But she had the faith and she ran with it with me and trusted us. I mean, you both took a risk. So, and that's what it's all about, I think. And yeah, so Complexity Salon works for themselves. We have our own resources. So, but this is what we love, conversation and opening it up. So any one of you out there with your own community, even Tahlia, if you keep going, you need space for conversations, we will come. We're like a film crew that we will come and do just like this. I mean, we prefer in person, but allow us to do what we love, but we will back it. Yeah. So, and I can't wait to see Laura's movie also. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Sophie. No, it's lovely.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's been great. I think, you know, it's something when you feel passionately and like we were talking about change, making change happen, and that's, I mean, I can't speak for you, Tahlia, but it's why I will just keep talking. So when I'm invited, I will go. So,
Great.
you know, because the more opportunities we have to talk, the more we can sort of start to change that oil tank, sort of move that oil tank around.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
we should do a movie in Australia, Tahlia. Maybe we
Yeah.
will find it, you know. So, and then we'll invite Laura over. I have all my team.
Yeah.
I can see everybody that's supporting us still here. I mean, there's Chris Roach, our advisor. Jean Bolton is supporting us. Kevin Flynn, Murray Stubbs, Drew Harrison, Chloe. We have everybody here supporting us, and it's really lovely that we can run with whatever you think is helpful.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sophie. It was really beautiful to get your email, and yeah, I was really honored to be invited to come speak at, you know, at something so.
I was surprised you didn't reject me because it's like, who's this Chinese chasing me down?
I'm like, she's a doctor. Oh my gosh.
Oh.
No, it's been great. Thanks so much for having me.
yeah, it's been very compelling, and I think doing it in this way in a world where everything has to be planned and you have to know the outcomes in advance, it's an attempt to design a frictionless world. Whereas we don't have a bit of friction, take risks, explore things, be moved by things, then nothing changes.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, I'd love to do another one in person. We can line it up.
Yeah, we could bring the film over as well.
I think so. Well, that would be fantastic. Yes.
We'd love it. Yeah, our audience over here would love it.
So it feels as though we're moving to a conclusion.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who wants to say anything before we close? Great. Well, it just remains to thank our two brilliant speakers, Tahlia and Laura. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Complexity Salon. Thanks very much to the delegates. Thanks particularly to Murray and Drew for being impresarios in the background. Thanks for our Complexity Salon supporters and anybody else who's been here today. It's been a great session. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Been lovely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.